a sign that some other things are about to happen?
Well, I do think it is a sign of a lot of things. First of all, it's a sign that market contagion is still a thing. A lot of mainstream economists and analysts have been arguing for the past year at least that essentially that because of central bank intervention, that markets and market contagion, a massive drop in markets was not possible anymore. Apparently, they were wrong because, as we saw from Friday to Monday, over 2,000 point drop, basically in two business days, which is a massive drop, the biggest drop in the stock market in years. So this shows that contagion is not only possible, but that we can lose all of the gains for 2018 in the span of only 2 days. So I think this is an important signal that this is not a one-off event, that this could very well happen again. And I do believe that in 2018 we will see several of these events occur.
So do you think this was done on purpose? There's a lot of people out there saying that, this was done on purpose to send Trump a message. Do you think this was done to send him a message or anything like that?
No, I don't think it had much to do with Trump per se. At least not directly. I've heard that theory that the memo issue, the FISA memo issue, was somehow connected to this. But I've actually, as far as my research goes, it seems like it had a lot more to do with Janet Yellen leaving the Fed and Jerome Powell being moved in. There was some papers released by the Fed from meetings taken in 2012, in which Jerome Powell is quoted basically as saying that the intervention by the Fed had created a massive bubble in stocks, and that bubble would need to be tempered. He basically admits in these papers everything that alternative analysts have been warning people about for quite some time. The indication being that Jerome Powell will be the guy who oversees the final implosion of this massive bull market rally. So there's that, and then also we have the Fed reducing its balance sheet. If you look at the reports or their data report that they released on the 31st of January, initially they had claimed that they were going to reduce their balance sheet by $12 billion. Instead, in January, they reduced it by $18 billion. So that's quite an expanded drop in the Fed balance sheet, much higher than they initially told the public. Why is that important? Well, if you've been tracking the behavior of stock markets over the past few years, as well as the increase in the Fed's balance sheet, you know that stocks have been rising in direct correlation with that balance sheet. In other words, the more purchases the Fed made, the higher stocks climbed. So if that correlation is directly linked, then the Fed, when the Fed reduces its balance sheet, stocks should fall. So the Fed announces its latest round of balance sheet reductions in January. The reduction is much higher than anticipated, and within a week we witnessed the largest 2-day market drop in years.
So do you think, you mentioned that we're going to see a lot more of these type of drops in 2018. Is he going to do this on purpose? Is he going to do it all in one foul swoop, or is he going to continually pop the bubble a little bit at a time? What's your theory on that?
I think this will be incremental, and I think that it will be deliberate. I see Powell as kind of where Ben Bernanke, for example, was the perfect candidate or the perfect front man for the Fed to institute stimulus measures and QE. I would say Powell is the perfect guy to bring the whole thing crashing down. Just according to his numerous comments that we've seen released, made back in 2012, it seems like his attitude towards this is, we need to take our medicine now and stop influencing stock markets and start getting back to what the Fed normally does, which, who knows what that really is. But as far as Jerome Powell's, image in the Fed, he's the perfect guy to bring this thing crashing down. Also, I would say that 2018, this date seems to keep popping up in establishment banking literature and arguments for things such as the institution of a global currency system, that sort of thing. So I would say that if they plan to stick to that kind of timeline, then a major crisis would be valuable to them sometime this year.
So when you say he's going to bring the market down and maybe get out of the stock market, which I don't see how they're going to do it, but maybe they can. I mean, how far down does it have to go to get to a normalization of a real market, if that's even possible?
Well, I would say, in my opinion, I would say that we'll see parity between gold price and stocks. So as the stock market begins to fall, I think we'll see a spike in gold, and that we'll see parity between those two markets. So obviously, more than a 50% drop in stocks.
Now, if the market does come down, let's say it comes down 40, 50, whatever it is, that's quite a bit, because right now it's like 26,000 or 25,000, and it comes down to about 12 and change, or 13, around that area. What effect is this going to have on pensions, on corporations? Because we know that the corporate debt levels, they're very, very high right now. What do you see happening if he actually does this?
Well, I would say, of course, you're going to see some pretty considerable wipeouts in corporate holdings, investment holdings. I think just the past couple of days, Monday and Friday, the drop had wiped out tens of billions of dollars for the top investors in the country. So if we see a loss of 50% or more, then as far as corporate investment holdings, there'll be a massive wipeout. This does a lot of damage for a number of reasons, but as you mentioned, corporate debt levels are at historic highs. So if they're heavily invested in this market and they see holdings wiped out, then that puts them in an even more precarious position as far as their debt levels are concerned. Not to mention the fact that the Federal Reserve is continuing to raise interest rates, and I believe they will continue to raise interest rates even if we see stock markets begin to flounder. They've done this before throughout history. If you look at past crashes, such as during the Great Depression, the Federal Reserve is notorious for continuing to raise interest rates into a stock market crash. So I think that will put a lot of corporations in an even more precarious position than they already are.
So you talked about the U.S. transitioning into a different type of currency. I mean, right now we see China, they've launched the Petro Yuan. We see Venezuela, they're looking at a cryptocurrency, I think it's called the Petros. And it looks like there's many, many countries out there that are moving away from the dollar. And if the system does come down like this and everything is a complete mess, the dollar at that point, does that become worthless? Will countries start moving away from the dollar? What happens in that scenario with the dollar and the reserve currency of the world?
I think Russia is also considering a national cryptocurrency, the crypto ruble, or something along those lines. So it looks like a lot of countries are slowly moving into the crypto world and away from normal forex markets. And if that is the case, which I suspect it is, then you'll see a pretty considerable decline in the use of the U.S. dollar internationally. Will it be gradual or will it be a shock event? That's hard to say. I do believe that there will be some shock moments as far as the dollar's world reserve status goes. I do think that eventually Saudi Arabia will announce that they're dumping the dollar as the petrocurrency. There's just too many negative factors in the oil world right now that indicate that the dollar will not be used as often as far as oil trade is concerned. China's petro yuan being one of those major factors. So I think it will be, for the most part, gradual. And I think it's interesting to me, the behavior of the dollar index as far as it's seen a considerable drop recently at the same time as the Federal Reserve has been raising interest rates, which is sort of seems to be decoupled from reality. Generally, if you have the Federal Reserve raising interest rates, you usually see the dollar index begin to climb in response. That hasn't been the case. It's been the opposite. So I would watch that very carefully, especially if the dollar continues to decline, not just while interest rates climb, but also if stocks are declining and the dollar is declining. That's another bad sign as far as the dollar's world reserve status goes.
Now, you mentioned the dollar, and we see it dropping, we see it moving up a little bit. It goes back and forth. But Mnuchin was out there, and it's funny because he mentioned something at Davos where he's looking to have a weak dollar policy, and then Trump came out and said, no, we don't want a weak dollar policy, we want a strong dollar policy. What do you think that was all about? But why do you think he actually came out and mentioned that at all?
Yeah, it is strange, some pretty strange behavior from the White House and the cabinet. I don't know if that is designed to make it look like there is a disconnect between Trump and his cabinet, or if there is actually a disconnect between Trump and his cabinet. I've also heard Mnuchin say, the opposite, that we need, I've heard him say that we need a strong dollar. I've heard him say that we need a weak dollar. So the guy is not really consistent himself. Neither is Trump, really, as far as what he was saying during his campaign and before the election, as far as the economy goes and as far as the Fed and the dollar go. And then after his election, his tone has changed quite a bit. So it's hard to say what that means. I think that I don't think there is a concerted message as far as the dollar is concerned. I think it's funny because there's negative elements either way you go. If you have a stronger dollar or a weaker dollar, it's a catch-22. So it doesn't really matter which way you go, at least as far as the image of the U.S. economy is concerned.
Now, talking about transitioning maybe into a different type of currency, do you think we're going to head into like a cryptocurrency type of world reserve currency, or do you think China is going to be the world reserve currency, or another country, or another type of currency? What do you think, or the SDR? Where do you think we're headed still from the last time we spoke? I believe you said the SDR. Where do you think we're headed now?
Well, I think that the massive reversal in a lot of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin that we've seen so far will probably continue. And I think the argument will be that I think that the establishment argument will be that, well, crypto and blockchain technology is a good idea, but we need to build a system that can be heavily regulated and controlled so that we don't see huge valuation swings in the currency like we're seeing now. I think that will be their argument. So as independent, whatever you want to call them, cryptocurrencies fall or continue to fall, I think that we will see more of these sort of national, such as in Russia, the crypto ruble. I think we'll see a lot more of these national cryptocurrencies instituted, and that over time, those will be combined into a basket system under the IMF and the SDR, and that will eventually evolve into a one world cryptocurrency system.
So you think that these cryptocurrencies will eventually be controlled by the central banking establishment?
Yes, I do believe that. I mean, as far as the crypto ruble goes, I believe that's completely centralized. I don't know if the central bank is openly. I haven't seen the central bank openly suggest that they should dictate everything about it, but it would be a centralized cryptocurrency system under the control of, at the very least, the government. So we are seeing these systems being suggested, crypto systems that are centralized being suggested. So I think that will be the beginning, and then eventually the IMF would take control over at least some kind of basket mechanism, much like the SDR, which would dictate valuations of all the currencies involved.
So you think this is how they're maneuvering everyone to get a one world currency system?
Absolutely. I think that crypto is the blockchain itself. It could be used for good, but it also has elements of it that could be used for evil. And the issue of trade transparency or loss of trade privacy is one of the major factors of blockchain technology that worries me. And I think it is a alluring tool for central bankers to use to control the population. If you have no privacy in trade, there's a lot of consequences for freedom that are involved or attached to that. And I do believe that, that central banks and the IMF will eventually the goal is to institute a global crypto system.
So if they do this, how are they going to make each country use this system? I mean, let's say, like Venezuela, they're saying, oh, no, we're making up our own. We don't want to, we'll trade within the crypto market, within the blockchain, but we're going to have our own cryptocurrency. How are they going to get all these countries to switch over to the controlled cryptocurrency market?
Well, I think that will be, at least as far as most countries go, that will be the job of their respective central banks. If you look at the behavior of central banks around the world, most of their policies have actually been highly coordinated, not contrary to each other. So that would indicate, first of all, that it would indicate that there is some kind of broadband sort of policy that is being shared by these banks. And if you look at the evidence concerning all of the banks, the central banks involved with the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS, if you look at a lot of the evidence and comments from the BIS, they indicate that, yes, the BIS is basically dictating global central bank policy. So it would be the job of central banks to push all of these countries into a single crypto system. Beyond that, I think what they'll do is they'll just make it they'll create a situation in which a lot of countries demand participation in a global currency system. I think they'll create a crisis in which people will be influenced to say or to ask for this, to ask for a new world reserve currency, a new cryptocurrency, and have it be a global currency. So generally, what the bankers do is not necessarily force people into a system. They create a crisis situation in which the people then ask for the solution that the bankers have been offering all along.
So when you say a crisis situation, what do you mean by that?
Well, for example, if we see a massive crash in the dollar index and the loss of the dollar as a world reserve currency, I think most of the world will be looking for an alternative. Now, the initial alternative would be, of course, a basket of currencies, which the IMF already has. The IMF has their special drawing rights, the SDR. So they've already staged everything they've already staged a replacement system for the world reserve for the dollar. All they need to do is then bring down the dollar and then wait for people to come to them for the solution that they've already built up.
So you're talking about crashing the system and crashing the dollar, crashing pretty much, I mean, they have to. I mean, the debt is just unsustainable. The whole thing is just, teetering on a disaster right now, the global economy I'm talking about. So if they do this, what happens to people that are holding the dollar? Are they going to get like a 1-to-1 ratio if we move to this new currency?
I highly doubt it. If you look at the valuation of the US dollar in special drawing rights, $1 is worth 0.64 SDRs. So if there was, say, today we had a sudden shift from, the dollar as world reserve into an SDR basket system, well, under that system, the dollar would be worth, almost 50% less than what it is, now in terms of international trade. So I think by the time this happens, that valuation will be much worse. So you're not going to be getting a 1-to-1 trade-off between SDRs and the dollar, or whatever the new cryptocurrency system is, and dollars. I think it will be we'll be taking major losses on our dollars for when that new system is instituted.
So what you're saying is that people are going to lose their wealth if they keep dollars in the bank, even though it's electronic blips. If they have 10,000, 20,000, they're going to lose a lot of that when we move into a new system.
Yes, I think a lot of people will be pushed into the cash market due to stocks eventually falling in a sort of contagion, kind of like we saw a hint of on Monday and Friday. I think people will be pushed into cash markets. Some people will be smart enough to go into gold and silver, but a lot of people will be pushed into cash, and then you will see a massive devaluation in the dollar as well, which is contrary to what you would expect in that situation. That generally stocks, when stocks decline, the dollar goes up, but I don't necessarily think that will be the case in the long term. I think stocks will decline and the dollar will decline at the same time, and that people will have almost nowhere to go. And so, a considerable amount of savings will be destroyed in that process.
Now, aren't the central banks worried about bringing the system down like this? Because, they manage the economy. They're telling us, we have to do stimulus. We're fixing the rates. We're unwinding right now. So we have full control of the economy. And if the system does come down, wouldn't they have to take the blame for the whole system crashing?
Well, as far as the bankers themselves, the globalists themselves, I don't think they necessarily will take the blame unless we do, alternative analysts, unless we do our job correctly and we inform people about what's about to happen. This is kind of why it's vital that we're doing what we're doing, because we need to warn the public that when these events occur, they know who to blame when it does. Unfortunately, there are a lot of tools at the disposal of the globalists in order to misdirect people and distract people. One of those tools would be a geopolitical crisis, such as a war. I still see major activity surrounding North Korea, including China now amassing about 300,000 troops right on the border of North Korea. I would say that that's still completely on the table. We see also this very strange situation in Syria with Turkey invading Syria and possibly coming to blows with the U.S. Troops stationed there, which would be essentially it'd be a war between two allies at that point if it gets that bad. So there's that situation. There's a lot of geopolitical situations that could develop. Also, another factor that I think is very important, and it's something I've not ever seen before in history, is the fact that with the leaving of Janet Yellen from the Fed and Jerome Powell taking the Fed chair, in the mainstream media, I'm seeing this constant sort of narrative, underlying narrative, that Jerome Powell is Trump's, quote, Trump's guy, and that this is, quote, Trump's Fed. I've never seen another president being given credit for a Federal Reserve. I've never seen another president. There was no Obama's Fed. There was no Bush's Fed. This is the first time I've seen this. They're saying it's Trump's Fed. So I would say even if, say, the Fed takes blame for elements of a crash, they're now the narrative is that this is Trump's Fed now. So by extension, Trump would get the blame for a crash, being that this is Trump's Fed.
So are you saying that maybe this individual Powell, maybe they don't have control over him, and he was chosen to maybe bring down the Fed, maybe, dismantle the Fed? Do you think it's that is one of the reasons, or do you think they're just trying to pin everything on Trump and just saying, yeah, this guy belongs to him too?
I think Jerome Powell, like any other Fed chair, is a completely controlled element of the central banking system. I don't think Trump has any say in what Powell does or what the Fed does. And I think this narrative being put forward by especially the establishment economic media that Powell is Trump's guy, I think that is part of a greater narrative that down the road they will exploit, meaning when the system begins to crash, they are staging in the public consciousness this idea that this is not, the Fed is no longer a separate and independent element. Instead, they belong to Trump, that they're dictated by Trump's policies. And if that's the case, if they can convince the public that that's the case, then as the Fed gets blame for what Powell does, so will Trump.
So how do you think the rest of this year is going to play out? I mean, how many more times do you think the market's going to come down? By how much? And where do you see this all going by the end of this year?
I believe we'll see multiple events like what we saw on Monday and Friday. I believe that we will see an initial market correction of 10 to 20%, and that in the near term, and that by the end of 2018 we will see an actual market crash or complete market reversal.
Brandon, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. Once again, how can people see your work?
They can visit me at alt-market.com. That's altmarket.com.
Brandon, once again, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me back.